Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rise Up L.A., Our Stories, Our Voices. My name is Ilana Gustafson.
And my name is Jenny Gillett.
And we are part of the Performing Arts program at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. And we're so glad that you could be with us today for this exciting program. I do want to thank the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs for their support of this program tonight and our Oral Stories Project, which is the origin of this program. So Jenny, would you mind telling everyone about this Oral Stories Project and the program they're going to see tonight?
Yes. First of all, thank you for being here. This project is the culmination of a year-long series of interviews. I got to interview more than 30 women over the age of 65 in and around Los Angeles. We got to talk about a lot of wonderful personal stories, also about things like views on feminism and how they've seen the gender equality movement grow and change over the years. And tonight, you will be seeing the culmination of this interview process. We have 5 women from the initial interviews that will be sharing stories. They're actually verbatim transcripts. You may notice that they will be reading occasionally. They are reading their own words. They're sort of retelling the stories that they initially told me in our interview process. And if you want, you can hear all of these interviews. You can also see a previous share out that we did in August if you visit our Oral Stories page. And I hope you will, because a lot of these moments and stories have been extremely moving, and I have certainly learned a lot.
Yes, I have enjoyed hearing the variety of stories, just been absolutely moving, and so happy we get to share this tonight.
Yes. So I actually was thinking that this past year is not necessarily a year that we might equate with connection, but this oral story project has given me an opportunity to connect with so many amazing people. And I think it also highlights how important storytelling is, especially intergenerational storytelling in our world today, because it can allow us to teach and to learn about things and times that perhaps we wouldn't have known about before. And I hope that as we move forward, we'll see more of this in museums and cultural institutions, because I think that there's no better way to learn about history and culture than by speaking to the people around us in our community, because really we are all living history right now.
Well said, Jenny. All right, well, everyone, please enjoy Rise Up LA, Our Stories, Our Voices. See you in the chat.
Thank you for being here.
Gosh, there are so many things I think that we can say about what makes women strong, but I can think of one word that perhaps encompasses everything, and that is resilience. I think that women have the power to be resilient. We make decisions, we make adjustments, we turn on a dime, we make things right, we care, we support, we do it all. We actually do it all. And so it's that resilience along with self-awareness that I think is a very powerful aspect of womanhood and of being a woman.
What my mother did and what she had, she was very happy in her life and her life choices. She could not understand why I wanted more. So that was a problem, a big problem. I was sent to college to get an MRS. It sounds like a cliche, but it was true at the time. It was very, very true. It was expected that we went to college, but it was not expected that we had careers.
In high school, we took something called the Cooter Preference Test to help with career planning. It still exists. We were given a pin and you poked a hole in the answer that was the most appropriate. And that's how they scored the test. When I was finished taking the test, the result was that I should be an optometrist or a pilot. And the school counselor started laughing because those careers weren't available to girls. There must be a mistake.
Being a girl and being a Black girl, I would have to show that I was good enough. And, when I came up under that kind of suppression, it was that I wasn't. I had older brothers who just thought I was a brat and I would never amount to anything because all I was going to do was get married and be a burden for some schmuck. And so I I had years of just trying to discover who I was. So I think, creativity comes from sometimes a lot of pain. and trying to find myself and feel like I belonged in this family.
Okay, do you all have time for a little story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, when I was a senior in college, I was very interested in going into research. And my mother's cousin was an orthopedic surgeon at a medical school in New York City. He was friends with the chairman of the department and got me a job working in the chairman's lab. And I was so excited about this. Every Friday after classes, I'd take the subway down there, and all day Saturday, I'd work in the lab. And in retrospect, it was really just scut work, but it was so exciting to me at the time. And, well, I never knew this happened, okay? I just actually found out about this from my mother, I would say maybe 15 years ago, when my mother and my daughter and I were discussing how things used to be for women. Well, the chairman of the department had a friend at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And when he had really good students, he would send them on to his friend's postgraduate PhD program. And what I did not know, there was also a male student working in the lab at the same time as me. And he chose the male student. And he told my mother's cousin that even though Sheila was really better, she's just pretty and she's going to get married and have babies.
Yes.
Yeah. So my daughter, who is an employment attorney, went nuts and she said, he can't do that. He can't do that. It's illegal. And I said, well, that was 1968 and he could do it and he did do it. But I went to graduate school anyway. I went on to have a very nice career in research and I did get married and I did have babies. And the point was I was a woman and it obviously was not something that I was supposed to be doing, at least according to the men.
Going to an all-women's college, there was no education department, there was no pre-nursing department. One was expected during the late 60s, early 70s, one was expected not to become a nurse or a teacher or a secretary. You were not allowed to. There was no way they were going to train you to do that. It was verbalized that one does not do that, because I think at that point, the women's movement was swinging way to the other side, where one had to participate and compete in a man's world. So what happened to me personally was I felt that I had to have a career. And it had to be a career that was not a traditional career. So I went to business school. I got an MBA and chose to become a CPA and worked on Wall Street. And I was expected, and it's funny, I didn't feel like there were any gender issues doing that. I was pretty much accepted, but I was not happy. I was pretty miserable because what I really wanted to do was I really wanted to become an elementary school teacher. That was just frowned upon. That was not what I was supposed to do with my life. It took me many years till I was 45 to say what the movement is really about is having choices. It's not about being part of a man's world. So I finally internalized that and became an elementary school teacher, which is what I always wanted to do.
In those days, I went for jobs or had jobs where I would be told, well, we can't really hire you for this position because the boss would prefer a blonde at the reception desk.
I went to work for Pacific Telephone and Telegraph, which was the phone company in the area before the big Bell telephone system breakup. When you were an employee of Pacific Telephone and Telegraph, you got medical insurance. But men and women had different medical insurance.
And on one job, I'll never forget this, I was asked to train this young man. It was a brokerage firm, and I was asked to train him to do whatever it was I was doing at the time. I think I was helping to set up the trades for the next morning, that sort of thing. And I trained him. And my boss called me into the office and said, "Oh, Dorsey, you've done a really great job in training this guy." And he said, "But he's getting married and he's going to have a family. And I'm going to have to let you go." And I was a single mother of 2 small boys at the time. So that was kind of the first time I had that kind of a slap in the face. And that was quite disconcerting.
Female employees had medical insurance that covered hospitalization, like if you needed your appendix out, or tonsillectomy, or you had a broken leg, that kind of thing. The male employees had that same kind of insurance, plus they had maternity coverage for their spouses. No Pacific Telephone and Telegraph employee was covered for maternity, for OBGYN coverage, because women who were pregnant should have a husband, and their husband's medical insurance should cover them.
So, they've changed things. Laws have changed. You have to be more respectful outwardly to people, which is a good thing. It's really a good thing. Because what people do behind your back, the conversations that are had that you don't hear, that doesn't hurt you as much, of course, as someone saying it to your face. That, well, if you were a blonde, you'd still have a job.
So I remember those things because there were jokes made about it at the time. But yeah, men and women had different insurance policies, and female employees did not have the right to have medical insurance for maternity purposes. So there.
My mother and my grandmother were both my role models. As I said, my mother was college educated, but my grandmother was also college educated. So these women to me were the absolute definition of what we refer to as feminism today, or feminist. They were independent, they were creative, they were smart, they participated in community. They were good at all the roles they played, being wives, being mothers, being role models, being professionals, and being active leaders in their communities. It was a very good and enjoyable and enlightening experience, not just to grow up knowing them, but as an adult, looking back and thinking about how strong and how interesting they were, and how powerful they were within their own right in supporting women and women's rights and racial equality. I think for African American women and for women of color, it's more than women's rights. It's women's rights and racial equality. They blend together. They belong together. And if you're a woman of color, you cannot really separate the two.
Our sons have had different kinds of role models. They've seen their mothers go out to work. And I remember a conversation I had with my son, and I'm thinking he had to be about, 8 or 9 years old at the time, because that's when we got our dog, who was a girl dog. And I was saying that I had to take her to the vet to be spayed. And he said, "Oh, Mom, you should have gotten a boy dog, and then you wouldn't have had to do that." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Well, a boy dog couldn't have had babies." And I said, "But a boy dog can make babies with a girl dog. And the boy dog is just as responsible for making the babies as the girl dog." Conversations like that, I think boys being raised by mothers like us has just been different. But one of my friends said the thing that really bothers her even today is if you look at a commercial on TV for a cleaning product, it's always a woman cleaning the house. Why don't they do commercials with men doing the laundry or men washing the dishes? It's insidious, you know, it's not like harassment, but it's showing normal life on TV as the woman doing the cleaning. Not so much the cooking anymore. Sometimes men can cook, but in cleaning commercials, it always seems to be the woman. And that, you know, things like that, they just need to be changed. They really do.
Oh, well, to be able to vote, for one thing, I think it helped in terms of bringing us together for the other parts of our lives where we need to have more knowledge and protection.
I really think that the vote was an important issue and a victory, a very important victory, because it allowed women to make a decision beyond the home, beyond being a wife and being a mother and a homemaker. And it allowed them to make decisions beyond their life in the home. So it was, to me, the beginning of perhaps what we know as the women's movement.
Yeah, you need the power. And I think the vote gave us power and a voice. And people had to pay attention to what we were saying, because now there was a whole new demographic that had to be appeased and listened to. You know, I can't believe it took as long as it did, but at least it happened. I think there are a lot of men even today who still think they can tell their wives how to vote. But I don't think there are that many women who actually listen to them.
No.
I think what I always felt was gratitude for the hardships that they experienced, the physical hardships, the jailings, the forced feedings, it was that aspect of it. It's what I remember learning about and feeling really thankful to these women for doing that for me.
My grandmother, Maria Teodosa Brown Lopez, her mother's maiden name was Brown, who was born in 1906. And women got the right to vote 100 years ago in 1920. So she was able to vote when she turned 21. But before the I voted stickers, there was a little paper stub that voters got when they deposited their ballot. She wore hers pinned to whatever she was wearing that day to show that she had voted. That was extremely important to her. On the other side of my family, that grandmother, Modestina Mufaleto, had really never had a voice in the world, in her family, in her home, any place. So although she was a US citizen, not on her own, but by virtue of being married to my grandfather who had naturalized, I don't suppose she had ever voted. And language was an issue with that grandmother too. But I'll throw this in, it has nothing to do with voting or votes. I have the original letter that the medical director of the Patton State Hospital in Riverside sent to my grandfather in the 1930s. He was seeking permission to perform a sterilization procedure on my grandmother. I suspect, given what we know today, that since this was her 10th pregnancy in 20 years and 2 of the babies died quite young, she was probably suffering from postpartum depression or even postpartum psychosis. I'm not sure. But he dumped her off at Patton, and the doctors there said that they could fix what was wrong with her if they could just do this sterilization. They needed his permission, not hers, to do the procedure on her. I think she was mostly just chattel, and she did her job. Decades later, this is going to sound really cruel, but one of my uncles, a fire captain with LA City Fire Department, stopped by the house. He saw his father on the floor and he asked his mother what had happened, and she said, "Papa fell down." And she had brought him a pillow and a blanket. When did Papa fall down? It had been 3 days. And there's a part of me that wonders if there was not a part of her saying, well, look, you nasty old man, if you taught me how to use a telephone or drive or have friends, I could have called for help. But there you are. I don't know. I don't know if she could have gotten help for him. But women who were not granted those rights, who were not treated as equals, were not the only ones who suffered from that oppression. Having a spouse like that was not always a plus for the man. I mean, my grandfather was on the floor for 3 days post-stroke and no help, because he had always kept that woman strongly under his thumb and only gave her those things he felt she needed to meet his needs.
Hollywood. I think that's the worst place in the world for women, or one of the worst. I mean, there are countries where they do genital mutilation, and that's a lot worse than what's going on in Hollywood. But for our country, I think the influence coming out of Hollywood of how women are depicted in movies, the inability for women to work, especially as they get older, because they're just not considered young and attractive. The constant need for surgical enhancement of their faces to look younger. I think Hollywood is just one of the worst things that ever happened. And I love going to the movies. Don't get me wrong. I love the movies. Even a bad movie is better than no movie at all. But I just think the industry is a disaster for women. You know, I grew up in New York, and when I go back there to visit, the women look different. Now, there are as many beautiful and skinny women there as there are here, but there are also women who just look like women. And there's tremendous pressure in the city to be perfect physically. And I just can't stand that. And the other thing I've noticed is that a lot of my friends, and I have almost no friends in the Hollywood community. You know, I was a scientist, so those aren't the people I knew. But among my friends, very few of the women color their hair. None of them have had any kind of Botox or have had any surgery. And I guess we're just more like the women I grew up with. I just think that the need to look perfect all the time that is thrown out there by Hollywood is just a bad image. It leads to anorexia and, I don't know, horrible things that little girls see. I don't know that it'll ever be fixed. Not in my lifetime anyway.
The human right to make choices, to have choices. To me, that's what it's all about. Yeah, and to be vocal about it. And I think it's really important to stand up and to use the word feminist in my life. So, yes.
I certainly would like to consider myself as a feminist. And I think that it's not a dirty word to me. I think it's a dirty word to people, perhaps, who don't really understand what it means. It does not mean that we hate men. On the contrary, I love men. But what it means is that I believe in myself and that I'm going to speak up for myself. I may not be heard, and that has happened a lot, where you speak up and people ignore you. They don't pay attention. But it means that I still am going to speak up for myself. And the idea that young women today are speaking up for themselves, the Me Too movement, oh, God bless it.
Yeah, I think I've been a feminist since I'm about 12, 13. Yeah, I'd say it first started. It was about not being able to have a bat mitzvah. I was the best Hebrew school student they had. And yet, because of the time, there was no bat mitzvah at that time. So that's what kicked it off.
I believe that it is a good thing, and that young girls today have so many women that they can look at and say, hey, I want to do that. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a scientist. I want to be an engineer. And there are amazing women that are doing this.
I would have intense arguments with the rabbi about this, and he would never budge, ever. I was never allowed to go up on the bima. I was never allowed to be in the central synagogue. I always had to be up on the balconies. It was a rough path. I think my experience with Judaism turned me into a feminist.
When I came up, they were there. I'm not saying they weren't there, but it was harder for me to find them. And in terms of women that look like me, it was even harder to find them. We are, and I'm learning every day about women who came up in the 1900s, who were feminists and strong, and who managed to do a lot, but you don't hear about them. And that can be women of any color. But a feminist is a real good thing.
Because of my parents and the independent women in my family, I grew up with gender equity being an expectation. I grew up with the belief that I was capable of attaining my goals, whatever they may be. So as I think back over my life, I have entered situations with confidence and preparation and the passion to be successful. There's a well-known quote from Eleanor Roosevelt that has resonated with me throughout my life and has guided me as well. She said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." When I think about that, it reminds me of the strength and power we have as women, and for me specifically, as a woman of color.
I went to work at a bank, and I was pretty good at the job, so they had me training 2 new hires. This was 1965, 2 men, young men I was training. One was single, one was married. And in the early days of automatic deposit of your paycheck, they deposited employees' paychecks right into their checking account. So on their first payday, I took them to show them how to read the ledgers to show them their paycheck had arrived. At which point I discovered that they were netting more than I was grossing. And I was the one doing the training. So I went over to the branch manager's desk and I said, "Excuse me, I'm getting paid less than these young men and I'm training them." He said, "Well, yes, they're in the management trainee program and you're a bank teller." I said, "I didn't know there was a management trainee program. How would I get into the management trainee program?" "Oh, it's not open to women." And I kind of got feisty and I said, "Maybe you better find somebody with exterior plumbing to train them because I'm obviously not competent enough to train somebody who's eligible for that kind of position." And he said, "Young lady, that will get you right out the front door of this bank." And I said, "Funny, that's where I came in." So I walked over and I opened my cage and my window and I started doing things. And about an hour later, I was called over to his desk and I thought, okay, this will be fun. This will be what it feels like to get fired. And I walked over and I sat down and he said, "I just got off the phone with personnel. You have a pay raise coming." I said, "I do?" "Yeah, there's a mistake, but there's a pay raise." "Okay." So I made $1 a week more than they did. So I went home after work and I called a cousin who I was very close to who was a lawyer. And I talked about the day and then this happened and explained the whole story to him and he started laughing. And he said, "I don't even know why that happened." He said, "I do." And I said, "Why?" He said, "The 1964 Civil Rights Act. They can't pay you less than a man." I said, "But I didn't know anything about this." He said, "Yes, but they don't know that you don't know. So they're assuming you asked for a raise because you knew that legally they were required to give it to you. So you got it." And so that was my introduction to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, where a woman had similar protections or some protections under the law. So I guess I got even feistier then. Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good question. Oh my gosh. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, I think, well, I love being a woman. I never thought about being anything else. I love it because I love being a mom. I love being a mother. And there's something that comes from watching your children grow up, and that I think, oh my God, this person came from me. And I was able to do this? Wow, that's really amazing. But I also think that it's the contribution that women make to life, to the world. It's very unique. We are all unique individuals. But the compassion, the warmth, the curiosity, and our ability to juggle 90 things at once and be able to look at problems and look at them in terms of long-term solutions rather than just momentary solution. I think women have the ability to do that, far greater than men. I think that we are more solid in who we are, and I think men kind of have a facade about themselves, but they don't really believe it. We're the better of the two.
You don't have to make a decision about your life when you're 18 years old. Life is going to take you in many different directions, and the choices that you make at 18 are not the choices you're going to make at 45. So give yourself a little time, be patient with yourself.
It has been remarkable to notice the generations that have followed me. Times change, issues change, challenges change, and with every generation, that's what happens. It's how that generation deals with those issues and challenges that defines who they are and also how successful they will be.
Know that you can recreate yourself if you choose to as well, which I did twice. So that's important to me because I felt, especially as a woman, that I needed to have a career and make a decision and choose at 18 and train and get that career on course. And so by the time I'm in my mid-20s, it doesn't happen that way all the time.
When I look at the generation now, the young people that I see, they have such compassion. They're smart, they're intelligent, they're paying attention, and they realize that there's stuff in the world that needs to be fixed. They want to do that. They want to be able to find solutions. And I just think that that's remarkable. And I admire them for that.
Some people are lucky enough to have it happen that way, but I was lucky to have women around me supporting my changes and supporting my decision to basically take 6 years or so of education, spending years studying for a CPA exam, working, and just putting that aside and just choosing to do that. It's okay to do that.
The one thing that I've learned is that those in my generation, perhaps we need to start listening sometimes to the young people of today. And of course, when advice is needed, we need to be able to give that advice because our lives, after all, have been based on decades of experience. But really, we do need to sit back and listen and watch these young people because they are the future and they're taking the future in their hands, in a sense, with their beliefs.
You can recreate yourself as you want to. There's no rule saying that you must stay or stick by all your decisions when you're young. So that's the biggest takeaway from my life.